a great conversation with schools in mind. So Emily and Jen, I'd love to invite you up. I know you guys have worked out some questions that I'm going to ask you about our equitable PTA funding. So I will go ahead and get this started. Actually, if you guys want to introduce yourselves really quick. Emily, I know we've seen you, of course, you're on our schools committee. And so if you want to start, and then Jen, you could follow with a quick intro.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Emily Sawyer. I live here in Windsor Park. I just finally joined the Neighborhood Association this morning.
Amazing.
It's on my list of things to do, right? So I just went ahead and did it when y'all were talking about it this morning. So I have 5 sons that attend AISD schools, and I joined the schools committee a few years back. It's one of the great joys of my life to work with the folks on that committee, actually. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to have Jen here and with us, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Jackie. Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Krieger. I am not fortunate enough to be in your neighborhood, but I am just on the other side of I-35 from you in North Loop, so not too far. I am kind of a native Austinite, and I connect with our schools in that I am a former AISD employee. I used to be their sustainability manager for the school district. So I got to work with all of the school campuses and really understand how you can make environmental education and outdoor learning and kind of clean green schools a thing. And I've stayed involved in various volunteer capacities through environmental education and outdoor learning groups, as well as the work that Emily and I are doing and a couple other groups related to really making sure that all our schools are producing equally high outcomes for all students. So really trying to address some inequities that are built into our current school system.
Great. All right, and I know you all have been hard at work on many fronts, and today we'll focus on the PTA funding and some questions around that. So we'll start with our first question. We've got 3. The first one is, who is the Equitable School Funding Group?
Yes, great question. So we actually have just created a name for ourselves. We are the Austin Alliance for School Funding Equity, which is definitely a mouthful. So if you have any creative ideas for catchy acronyms, we're all ears. But right now we're a group of about 35 parents and PTA members and officers, staff from the school district, and kind of community members at large. And we're working towards more equitable funding and resource distribution across all AISD schools. We really kind of got together just recently, back in May of this year, as a way to show support for the school district's decision to no longer allow kind of the use of PTA and other forms of private funding to staff, teachers, and other positions at AISD schools. So we started off with kind of a letter writing campaign to show our support and to say we want to be involved, we want to help the school district continue its move towards more equitable funding sources and distribution of funds. And a lot of us are still going. I guess maybe one other thing I would mention is just, I know we get some questions sometimes about what really do you mean by equitable funding or equitable resource distribution? So for us, the idea of equitable funding is making sure that we're providing students with the resources, financial and non-financial resources that they need to succeed, not only in their school years, but throughout their life. And I think, one common misconception that comes up is that when we say equitable funding, we don't mean equal funding, meaning we don't mean the exact same dollar amount per student at every AISD school. And the reason for that is really just because our students' needs are not all the same across all 100+ AISD schools. And that's because there are just some underlying kind of social inequities related to race and physical and mental and learning abilities, family income, you name it. And so we're really focused right now on ensuring that the school funding that AISD has is equitably shared across AISD schools according to student need. But that said, we do recognize that AISD's current funding levels and really funding overall for all our public schools in this country is woefully inadequate. it's not sufficient to meet all of our kids' needs. So in addition to really promoting and working with the district and community partners for more equitable distribution of money based on need, we are also advocating for greater school funding across the board for all our AISD public schools.
Okay, great. Emily, not sure if you have anything to add, otherwise I can move. Okay, I'll move to the next question. So why is the issue of inequitable parent fundraising important to the members of this group? Can you share a little more about that?
Yeah, there's a few things, and Emily and I think we'll kind of tag team this section a little bit. And I know that this can be a touchy subject, but there really are just some existing inequities with the way that we fund our schools, including the ways that PTAs contribute funding to our schools. So, one thing just to kind of give you a feel for what the imbalances in PTA funding look like right here in Austin. There's a local nonprofit called the Gisalo Cycling Initiative, and they're actually a bicycle organization. They provide kind of bicycle skills training and confidence building for all ages, including students in our schools. But they did an exercise just to think about where they are directing their programming and how they're funding their work in AISD schools. So one of the things that they looked at was how much money different schools' PTAs raised in a given year, which is really tricky to do. Most PTAs don't make that information publicly available unless you're really large and have significant fundraising availability. And in that case, because PTAs are 501c3 nonprofits, they do have to generate annual tax forms for the IRS. And so if your PTA is able to raise more than $50,000 in any given year, you have a more detailed tax form that you fill out that provides some insight into how much you're raising. So what Gisalo did is they looked at all 80 or so of AISD's elementary schools and tried to understand how much money they were getting from their PTAs. So there are 47 elementary schools that have PTAs here in Austin that also qualify for Title I funding, which means that they have more economically disadvantaged students, and so they have greater financial needs and social needs in those schools. So all 47 of the AISD elementary schools that have PTAs and qualify for that Title I funding, they all filed tax returns that indicate they raise less than $50,000 a year. Whereas most of the higher financially resourced elementary schools, they reported receiving more than $50,000 a year. And just to make that a little bit clearer, there were 16 out of the 80 elementary schools that reported raising more than not just 50,000, but more than 100,000. And in fact, there was one school that raises more than $1 million most years. And I think another thing to point out with this is that it just shows the financial disparities also kind of follow our race and economic disparities that exist geographically in our city due to redlining and past practices, housing and land use policy practices here in Austin. So all but one of those 16 PTAs that raise more than $100,000 a year are located west of 35, and most of them are located west of Mopac. You actually have one of the schools, the exception school, Blanton, that does raise more than $100,000 a year. I suspect some of you may help with that. But the reason that AISD changed their policy to no longer let PTAs fund staff positions at their schools this coming school year is because it exacerbates those financial gaps and therefore those learning gaps and those student achievement outcomes across our schools. And if you look at the schools that raise the most money, so if we focus in again on those 16 PTAs that raise more than $100,000 a year, those are also largely the same schools that historically have funded staff positions. In fact, just in the past school year, so we're talking during COVID, there were PTAs across AISD that donated more than $500,000 to fund staff positions at about a dozen schools. So the district has something like 125 schools and only a dozen are getting that extra infusion. And I guess just one other thing to point out is it's not just the PTAs funding staff positions, but PTAs can also, while they really help address some very real needs in our schools, they just, like I said, they exacerbate those imbalances. So if we look at another example of a lot of times PTAs fund outdoor equipment on their campuses. So I mentioned earlier that I'm involved with some outdoor learning groups. We have actually done an assessment of all the elementary schools across AISD to try to better understand kind of what resources, amenities that they have at their schools. So it's things like shade structures, I heard y'all mention earlier, it's things like benches and picnic tables and sports equipment. And, you know, just another relatively seemingly small example of how you get this big divide is that there's a Gillette Elementary, which is in Allendale here in Austin. If we just look at a seemingly small thing like outdoor benches, Gillette has 61 benches on their school campus. Whereas if we look at, again, another elementary school in your neighborhood, Andrews has exactly one, at least a year ago when we did this assessment. So it's just not to say that this is a reflection on the commitment and engagement of the Andrews school community, but it really just, again, highlights a failure of our current system that allows parents financial resources to influence the experience of our students at our schools without thinking about how our school-specific infusions of cash can further drive disparities across all AISD schools.
Yeah,
so,
I was gonna say it seems like a huge task at hand, and I commend you and everyone that's working on this to, you know, it seems like obviously there's not an easy solution, and it's working on, you know, figuring this out, because it seems very big, very, you know, comprehensive to wrap your head around. So yeah, and I wanted to also note, I posted in our chat just that the disparities map, the PTA funding analysis. So folks that are watching, if you'd like to take a look at that. Emily, was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
I guess I would just mention that, you know, it's easy to feel, I'm a parent at Blanton. And so it's easy to feel like we're just trying to help, right? And what's the problem with just trying to help our school? And like I said, I recognize that from my personal experience. And so I think for me, the biggest like shift in perspective has been around what the value, like the mission, vision, and values of PTA actually is. And the fact that PTAs aren't meant to be primarily fundraising organizations. And so that really helped me sort of frame this in a way that wasn't like, these are bad parents or I'm a bad parent, but just that PTA has a mission that's really focused on advocacy and providing for all students. So I really think this is an opportunity for us, if we can make the choice as PTAs to shift away from fundraising focus and to focus on the power of parent advocacy, because parents are really powerful. You know, board of trustee members, local city officials, county officials, state officials listen to parents. They really do listen to parents. And if we can get a really powerful parent advocacy group going that says we value public education funding, we value resources that are adequate and equitably distributed, we could really, I think, and this is why I get excited about this work, we could really change public education for the better for everyone, rather than just tinkering on our campus, providing for the students who happen to attend our kid's school at that same time that our kid is there. We could make an impact that really changes the system. And that's so exciting to me. And I really hope if folks, you know, have questions or, you know, even if they have, you know, hard feelings, that they'll reach out to us so we can talk about it, because that's really what it takes, is just to talk about it. And then one last thing I wanted to mention, if you listened to the AISD board information session that happened on Thursday evening, I feel like Superintendent Dr. Elizalde really did an excellent job of explaining one of the main reasons why she made the decision she made about not allowing PTA funds to pay for positions. And that is that in order for the district, AISD as a whole, to be able to receive Title I funding from the federal government, they have to be able to show that there's a differential in the resources allocated to schools that qualify for Title I funding and schools that don't qualify for Title I funding. So if parent and other private donations are closing that differential gap, we could actually lose our access to Title I federal funds as a district overall. So that's actually a really serious issue that she as a superintendent has to deal with. And I just think, like, I didn't understand that until a few months ago. And I'm happy to, like, again, talk to anyone who, like, just doesn't understand what that means or isn't sure how it applies to them, because it is really complicated and we all just want to help. And again, I recognize that feeling from a personal perspective. So super happy to be here and talk about this and just share my experience.
Well, that's really helpful. I appreciate you sharing that perspective, because I think that there's likely many folks out there that feel very similar. Like, we just want to do the right thing. We just want to help. So, you know, and kind of walking through some of those intricate challenges really, really helps paint the picture. And like you said, kind of zoom out a little bit to figure this out. So thank you both for that. So shall we move on to our last question? All right. So what are ways that people can get involved? So you've talked about some great things here. You know, how do we get people engaged, and what are those resources?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think Emily hit the nail on the head. We're really looking for folks who are interested in kind of shifting our show of support for all of our students across AISD, from, you know, fundraising for specific schools and for specific classes, but really collectively, you know, aggregating our power to advocate for real policy change that will create more adequate funding across our public schools and make sure that it is directed to those students who most need it and who can most benefit in improving their academic and life outcomes. So there's a few different ways that we're organizing our work, and we would definitely encourage you to join us. I will, in my minute, drop my email in the chat, and I know you already know Emily, and she already put out the call to reach out to her, but you can reach out to me if you want to learn more. But the three things we're working on are advocacy, really culture change, and then doing supplementing some research that's already out there. So kind of digging into those three things a little bit more around the advocacy piece. We're very interested in working with AISD, with the Austin Council of PTAs, which is the umbrella organization for the school level PTAs. And then also working with various kind of education advocacy groups across the state so that we can, you know, magnify our collective voice to develop a strategy for increased school funding for AISD and all public schools across the state, and even, you know, potentially at the federal level. And we're also encouraging folks and giving them the tools and the know-how to be able to advocate to the AISD school board as well as our city council as appropriate. The second thing I mentioned was the culture change. So really shifting culture within PTAs and school communities through education and training and community building. So to give you a taste for kind of what that looks like, one of our members is organizing a coalition of PTAs from schools that qualify for Title I funding to really dig in and understand their needs and identify ways to build community and resources within those schools. And then we're also interested in working with the Austin Council PTAs to offer training and resources to PTAs across the district so that we can help increase awareness and action around ways to use and share their resources more equitably to support our Austin school community. And then the last piece is the research that I mentioned. So really bringing awareness to some of the existing school funding inequities that are out there by supporting existing work that's being done and potentially helping to fill some of the gaps. So there's a really solid report that the Texas Civil Rights Project sent to AISD in 2012 that highlighted some of the district's inequitable funding practices and made several recommendations. So actually later this week, we're going to be meeting with AISD personnel to understand kind of if and hopefully how a lot of those recommendations have been implemented in ways that we can bring awareness back to those issues and those solutions. And then we're also connecting with others across the country who are a little bit ahead of us in terms of shifting their school funding systems to more equitable models. So there's some groups in Portland, in Illinois, in Seattle that really have a great model for us. And we're hoping we can learn from each other and lift each other up nationally as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Emily, I wanted to touch base. Is there anything that you'd like to add? I saw something about maybe a last something in the chat we wanted to share.
Sorry, I'm making notes for myself in our
Oh,
document,
okay.
so that's my bad. I do want to bring attention though to what I believe Gloria posted in the chat on Facebook. Just that, you know, this is an ongoing conversation that really has, it existed before Jen and I. The work that the group is doing is ongoing. There have been community members across Austin, for many years working on this. And so, it's not a one-off, and we're really excited to take a deep look at how we can improve our public education system, because it's an investment for all of us, whether you have kids, in public schools or not. It is an investment for all of us, and it really will make Austin and Texas stronger if we have these excellent, adequately, equitably funded school systems. So thanks for this opportunity, Jackie. So appreciate it.
Oh, of course. Thank you both for your hard work. And obviously, as you mentioned, all of the folks that have been working on this, you've definitely filled in some gaps for me and understanding. And I'm sure there's so much more on top of that. And I really appreciate both your openness and, just the empathy that you share too. And, just having the conversation. I think that's insanely helpful for, something that's as difficult and, challenging as this. So thank you both for that. And we look forward to hearing more and wish you the best, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you both.